Hi folks, I'm here with Mark Arnold, who is the Additional Needs Ministry Director for Urban Saints, and he blogs over at the Additional Needs Blog Father, which is a brilliant blog if you've not checked it out already. Hi Mark.
Bless you, Tim. Hi, great to be with you.
Oh, it's lovely to have you. It also says in your Twitter feed that you're an advocate for all things SEND. Tell us what SEND stands for.
Yeah, so SEND is a term that crops up a bit more in the education world than it does anywhere else, but special educational needs and disabilities. And it really just sort of covers everything that's going on with children, young people who are disabled, diverse, different in any way.
That's lovely. Well, we certainly can't cover everything today. So we're gonna narrow in on the sort of autism spectrum, ASD, young people with autism in our youth groups. So I'm going to kick us off with what do you think might be most important to a young person with autism when attending a youth group, or when deciding to attend a youth group?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question to start off with. It's a really hard question to sort of limit to one thing. So I think I've got sort of two or three quick things to feed into that. The most important one, though, is acceptance. It's just for a young person to feel valued, understood, listened to, the folk that they're engaging with, the leaders, maybe the other young people too, just accept them for who they are. And that's really, really important. And it just then builds that relationship and that bond which continues to then help them to want to come back. And probably number two is that relationship, particularly with a trusted leader, somebody they can turn to if they're struggling, if they're finding things hard, that they've got that confidence, that relationship, that trust, that they can chat that through with somebody and say, hey, I'm really finding this hard, or I just need to take some time out. And probably the third one would be knowing what's going to happen, what's expected. So no surprises, knowing what the plan is for the session, and to be aware of anything that's going to be different in advance. So there's a bit of processing time, a bit of sort of thinking time that can be done before they rock up.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And actually, on those first 2 points, you'd hope we were trying to do those things with every young person.
Well, you'd love to think so, and and in a lot of cases that's true. But sometimes that isn't always easy. If you've got a big group, loads of young people, sometimes youth workers can feel under a lot of pressure, and so specifically seeking out and spending time and getting to know a particular young person is not always something that they think of, but it's so important. That relationship makes such a difference.
Yeah, I think so. And I love your last point about knowing what's coming, because as youth workers, we do like to shake things up, and we do like our surprises.
Yeah.
But actually, that could be really unhelpful, as it sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, well, it can be. I mean, no autistic young person, young people are the same, so there'll be differences there. But generally, having some idea of what's planned, what's expected, what might be more difficult for them, and therefore that they might need to think a little bit around and plan a little bit around, maybe with their leader, as to how that's going to work for them. It just helps to set an expectation with them, with their leader, and is much less likely then to create that sort of anxiety and stress that can build up if things are, they've got no idea what's happening now, what's going to happen next. And that stress and anxiety can then develop to the point where maybe they're having a meltdown, and then that's not great for anybody.
No, that's helpful. So maybe something like a little sheet of paper with game, study, game, that they can tick off as they go along.
Yeah, it's sort of thinking about what works best for them. So all kinds of different sort of structures for that. Sometimes I've seen visual timetables used that might have photos of the different things that are going to be happening, the different leaders they're going to be perhaps engaging with. Sometimes that can use symbols. If they happen to use symbols as part of their communication technique, then use symbols to create a timetable that helps them understand what's going to be happening. Chat with them. It's back to that understanding, that relationship, that trust, getting to know what works for them, and then making sure they're equipped with the tools they need to make the most out of their time now. And particularly if next week is going to be really different, if you're throwing a party or doing a trip or something that's going to be really, really different, making sure they've got plenty of time to process and think that through and prepare and plan for that can make a huge, huge difference.
It's great. We're 5 minutes in. I'm already going to be watching this back, taking notes. Fantastic. It sounds like, we know no youth worker wants to make life difficult for any young person, but it sounds like there are things we could unknowingly do that could make it difficult for a young person on the autism spectrum. What might some of those key things, I'm thinking, what key things could we be doing in youth groups regularly that could be unknowingly making life difficult for young people with autism?
Yeah, I guess there's a bunch of things again there. One of them is in youth work, everything is fast paced, everything's loud, everything's turned up to 11, everything's full on, and and that's great, but that doesn't work for everybody. And that can be overwhelming for a lot of autistic young people, and they can really, really struggle with that. They can often cope with it in short bursts, but if the whole program is flat out and there's no chance for a little bit of respite in there for them, then that can be really hard. And so, thinking about what are those little sort of islands of calm that we can include in there that can be helpful for them. And to be fair, we talked at the beginning about there's lots of different additional needs. And there are, but even some young people that have no diagnosed additional need, sometimes struggle with the, flat out dial at 11 youth work that so often we do. So thinking about that, another thing probably that we fall into the trap of more than maybe we should is to think that inclusion means that everybody has to do everything. And that's not actually what inclusion is about. Inclusion is about helping everybody to do the things that we're doing together, but in the way that works for them. So that might be that there's several things happening in different styles and with different approaches that different young people who work better in different ways can tap into. So it doesn't have to be everybody doing the same thing together at the same time. And sort of linked to that, and specifically, I guess, around autistic young people, is autistic young people aren't the same either. So if you have an autistic young person, you've developed a strategy that really works for them, and then another autistic young person comes along, we can sometimes say, oh, well, we'll just, repeat what we've got going for one young person with another, and it'll be fine. But again, it's back to that relationship thing. It's understanding what differences there are between those young people and fine-tuning and adapting to suit their needs. It's about us doing the adapting, really, rather than expecting the young person to.
No, that's really helpful. I particularly liked your phrase, islands of calm.
Yeah.
There's no ministry that's not going to be helpful in. Little islands of calm. I think we, a few years ago, started changing our youth groups to be youth groups for kids that don't do youth groups.
Yeah.
We wanted to take it down from 11 to, somewhere like 6 or 7 and create those spaces. And one of the things we discovered was young people with additional needs found it really safe. Yeah. And we had more young people with additional needs coming, and it helped everyone connect together. So we didn't have many leaders at the time, but we found that the other young people were really engaging with the young people with additional needs and helping them belong in a way they couldn't anywhere else. So I think it's really helpful.
No, I think that's really good. And, I think that helps a wide range of young people because, there are young people who love the full-on, full energy, everything loud kind of youth work. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's just recognizing that, there are a lot of young people for whom that doesn't work. Now, some will struggle through it, cope with it, and get along with it, but there are plenty that won't, and maybe they're the ones that disappear, that we then lose touch with and we don't see because they've just they're really not able to cope with it in the long term.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And this prompts a slightly different tack question, which is What do you think of some? We can always learn things from young people. We know that. We should be learning from young people. Their world and experience is different to ours. They can give us new perspectives, but particularly young people with autism. What are some of the things that we could learn from young people with autism that we might not have gotten otherwise?
I think, one of the things that I've found, and increasingly others have found, is that autistic young people often have really inquiring, curious minds. They're not easily put off with a quick answer to something. They want to know the full information. They want to know what's going on. They want to know the full detail, and that can challenge us to dig deeper ourselves. To not just give a glib answer and think that's going to be good enough, but actually, they'll come back with more questions. They really want to satisfy themselves that they understand it fully, and that's a real blessing for us, because it helps us to dig deeper too, and I think that that's really important. I think another thing that helps us is just understanding that sometimes when an autistic young person doesn't respond, if there's a discussion happening, if there's some questions being thrown out there, it might not be that they haven't got a response. It might be that they're really deeply thinking that through. And it's often worth giving them the time to do that. And even if we come back a bit later and say, hey, has anybody had any more reflections about what we were looking at earlier? Might be that there's a really insightful thought that they've been thinking about for a little while, and it's worth hanging on for that, I think, and really helping them to express that. Because they can be deep thinkers. They can, really grapple with things, and it can, really focus their minds for a while. So it's great to journey with them on that, and learn with them and from them as they do that.
Yeah, fantastic. No, really, really helpful. I love the idea of the curious, inquiring, digging minds, which of course is what we all need to have to pursue that relationship with God. So really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's go back to the youth group, and let's look at some practical things. A new youth worker is about to start their brand new youth project for the first time, and they want to make it autism friendly. What's a couple of things that they should be thinking about right from the beginning to make sure what they do really will be autism friendly on a broad scale?
I think probably one of the first things to look at would be, is it a sensory safe space? Is the program that we're putting together going to create sensory overload? Is our environment, the place where we're meeting, a place that's likely to create sensory overload? And all of our senses as a part of that. And so thinking about that, thinking about again those islands of calm, but just is there an opportunity to create a safe space that young people can use and access if they are feeling overwhelmed, if they are feeling that it's getting a bit too much. Now I've seen safe spaces, everything from fully equipped sensory rooms that are really, really sort of state of the art, right down to a group I went to visit where they had a couple of bean bags and a bookshelf over on one side of the room, and there was an autistic girl in the group. And when she was feeling overwhelmed, she showed a little card to her leader, got a nod in return, and she just made her way over there and just spent a few moments in calm. There were some resources there that she could have a look at, some fiddle toys that she could access, and she was able to calm and get herself back into a place where she could rejoin the rest of the group. It was so simple, but so effective, and it clearly had been something they'd worked out together or with parents, and it really worked. So thinking about that kind of thing, but also again thinking about communication. How do we understand how an autistic young person communicates? Now they may well be able to speak and be verbal. They may supplement speech with other forms of communication. That could be symbols, it could be signing, something like Makaton. It could be that they're non-verbal and their communication is entirely using other methods. It could be that they use an iPad to help them communicate, for example, or lots of different ways. But understanding how they communicate helps us then to be able to draw them in. And on that topic, really important to emphasize that even for a non-verbal autistic young person, it's very likely that they can fully understand speech, but they just don't choose to use speech to communicate themselves. Often there's that misconception that a non-verbal autistic young person doesn't really understand speech, and so I've heard people having conversations about a young person who's right there, and I've had to sort of carefully say, actually, they can probably hear and understand every word that we're saying. So, but that communication really important. Understanding how they communicate, and again, it's us adapting. It's us sort of linking into their world and their way of communicating and their needs, and making sure we meet them.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful, and I might just add in, if I may, that if you've talked to, if you have a young person attending for the first time that is on the spectrum, often with a teacher or with a doctor or a social worker, they've come up with a one sheet of information. I mean, you'll know these much better than I do, but what makes me calm, what makes me stressed, and if you ask to see that one sheet, you'll be informed right from the word go what's going to help you work with that young person. Does that make sense?
It does, and it's a great resource. And yeah, those sheets are often sort of coming with a young person. If they don't, and actually this is a great exercise that you can do with young people anyway. If youth leaders find their way over to the Chef Kids website, chefkids.co.uk, it's a site run by Sheffield City Council's Children's and Youth Team. And in the resources area, there's an adult section for youth leaders and teachers and so on. There's a resources section, and you can download one-page profile templates there that ask those sorts of questions. And it's a great thing to do with all your young people. You get to find out loads about everybody. But it's particularly helpful then for young people who have additional needs of different kinds, just to understand how they can be supported best.
It's fantastic. And they are really helpful. We did it with our whole youth group. As a result, our leaders said, can we do it with each other? I then took it home and my wife said, can we do that with each other? And all of us learned things about each other. Brilliant.
Oh, yeah, it's such a great tool to use.
Fantastic. Can we do some myth busting, Mark?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
If you're new to this channel, with the interviews, I like to do a myth busting section where I give a fictional statement, something that someone could say about a topic, and just have our guest respond to that statement as if they'd heard it from a real person, really meaning it. So this is the first one I've got. Young people with autism can't engage in normal youth group activities.
Okay, yeah. So what's normal? That's the first question. Every youth group's different. All the different activities that so there is no real normal sort of youth work activity. But I think the question within the question there is that what a group sets up, what a bunch of leaders set up, is what's often in their heads, what they view as being youth activities that they want to run with. It's about us adapting. It's about us thinking about the activity, the environment we're going to be running it in, and all the young people that we're hoping to engage with it. So looking at it, not just from the point of view of autistic young people, but young people with a range of additional needs, young people who are introverts or extroverts, young people who are younger or older. There's loads and loads of differences and diversities that will be present in any youth group. Yeah. And so trying to find activities that are accessible to everybody at the same level is really hard. So often it's about having different things going on, a bit of pick and mix, a bit of options that young people can choose from that better meet where it itches for them, and gives them activities that they enjoy, because there is no normal.
It's a great response. Actually, it's really helpful because I don't want to use the word immature, but I'm going to. Immature youth ministries, even really big ones, often have just one or two types of people which reflect the type of leader they've got. And healthy, mature youth work knows how to engage multiple types of people all in the same space. So that's really helpful. This is the second myth to bust.
Okay.
Young people with autism should be left in children's groups.
And sadly, I could share loads of stories with you of where I've seen that happening. Teenagers that I've seen still in creche.
Wow.
Incredible. No is the answer. They shouldn't be left in children's work. But the transition between groups, now whether that's going up through the children's groups into the youth group settings, needs to be handled carefully, and it needs to be handled well. It can't be rushed. It takes time. Usually a good way of working that process is thinking about the things that child or young person really enjoys doing, and then picking a time to visit the next age group up when they're doing something like that.
That's good.
And so they spend maybe 5-10 minutes the first time in that new setting, just engaging with whatever they're doing that young person enjoys, and then they go back to the group that they've been in, and then you increase it to 15 minutes, and then maybe 20 minutes, and over a series of weeks you gradually transition them from one group to the next. And that, with all the other things we've been talking about timetables and about relationship and all those things, building those as you go, can then make it a successful transition. And it's important that young people transition with their peers, but it's important that it's done well and managed well to help them to cope with that transition, because it can be hard, but to cope with it well.
No, that's really helpful. And I think that prompts another question briefly before we do our final myth, okay, which is the other end of that spectrum, where young people would usually graduate out of youth groups, but often young people with autism stay in the youth groups until mid-20s.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Should that happen? Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Yeah, youth work tends to be extending anyway. And that can be true of any group. One thing that's always really useful to do with young people generally, and autistic young people no different in this, is to think about how young people can serve their church community. What is it that they're good at? So if you happen to have for example, an autistic young person who is really into tech, trying to get them involved in the audio-visual sound stuff within the church, so that actually they start to get involved in helping and supporting that work, and that becomes part of their ministry. Or maybe they're into music, or whatever it is that they like to do. Is there a way of getting them to get transitioned into the broader church in a way that gives them a sense of purpose, and a sense of serving, and a sense of this is why I'm here, and bit by bit that transitions them out of youth work into mainstream congregational church work.
Really helpful. I love how so much of your model relies on us working with the wider church, with schools, with parents. It really feels like this is a community effort, and that's fantastic. Yeah. Well, let's do our final myth. I've heard this one myself from parents. Young people with autism can't make friends with other young people. The way I normally hear that is my son can't make friends with.
Right. Yeah. And I've heard that too. No, it's not true. It is a myth. Autistic young people have just as much empathy, just as much care for other people, just as much a desire to make friends and have friendships with other young people as anybody else. Sometimes that can take longer to develop, and there can be all sorts of reasons for that. A lot of autistic young people will have had a rough ride maybe, and maybe there have been people that have been less than kind to them, and so there's a trust that needs to develop, because maybe they've been hurt before, and so that can take time, but they can be wonderful friends, loyal, caring, thoughtful, considerate friends, and those friendships can be really deep and really meaningful. But maybe they just take sometimes a little longer to develop.
Fantastic. Mark, I like to end these sessions with a bit of a final thoughts. And what I mean by that is there anything you've really wanted to say, but I've just not given you the room to say it? Anything that you'd like to throw in as a, just don't forget this thing? Do you know what I mean? It's over to you, basically.
Yeah, okay. I think my final thought then would be that youth groups, churches as a whole, that are diverse, that do include and create belonging for everyone, whatever their additional needs or disabilities or other differences or diversities might be. Are churches that seem to thrive and seem to grow and seem to really be blessed in that, and so my encouragement would be to youth workers to really think about how to make what they're doing as inclusive as possible, how to create belonging for everyone, because belonging is really the key here. We talk about accessibility, which is physically being able to be present and to take part in what's going on. We talk about inclusion, which is sort of having a role to play in some way in what's going on in church. But belonging is about, this is my church, this is where I belong, this is where I'm valued, this is where I can lead, I can serve, I can do anything that anybody can do in the church environment. And that's the goal. And where we see that happen for everyone, and where particularly young people with additional needs are given those opportunities, it just seems to raise the level of the whole church, and the culture of the church, and the outreach of the church. And it's wonderful to see that when it happens.
Fantastic. Any key resources that you'd like to point us to, particularly new youth workers, students? What would you put in their hands? What would you send them to online?
There's a lot of resources out there. I think a great starting place would be to encourage youth workers to join the Additional Needs Alliance. Nice. Because the Additional Needs Alliance, there's a Facebook group. If youth workers search in Facebook for Additional Needs Alliance, they'll find it there. There's also a website, additionalneedsalliance.org.uk, and those places are places, particularly the Facebook group, where it's found out 2,500 children's, youth, families, workers, parents who are on this journey of working with children and young people with additional needs and disabilities. And so there's an opportunity to ask questions, to look at what's going on, look at the conversations that are happening, to access the resources that are there. There's loads of resources that they can tap into and use, it's just a great place to learn from other people maybe who are a bit further down the road than they are on that journey.
No, it's really helpful. And you, Mark, where can people connect with you? How can we learn more about what you're putting out there?
So from an Urban Saints point of view, if they go to urbansaints.org/additional needs, they'll find loads about what we're doing in that space, resources that, again, people can tap into, training that we provide, less face-to-face at the moment, but we're still doing some online stuff. And just to explore with us the things that we're doing at Urban Saints in that space. If they want to have a look at some of the blog content that I'm putting out there, and there's stuff for children's and youth workers in there, there's stuff for parents, there's stuff we talked about, sensory stuff earlier. There's a whole section around that, and ways to make the stuff we do more sensory accessible. Then the additional needs blogfather.co.uk is the place to go to check my blog out, and it'd be great to connect with people through that as well. All those things you can access directly through the urbansaints.org/additional needs website as well. There's links to the Additional Needs Alliance and the blog and everything else through that too. So maybe that's the place to start.
Yeah, and I'm a big reader of Additional Needs Blogfather blog, and it is epic. There's lots of stuff on there. There's resources, there's stories. It's a fun read. It works. Really do want to plug that.
Bless you. Thank you for that.
Mark, this has been immensely helpful. I feel like we've always scratched the surface, but there's so many things there we can already take away. We're going to have you back, and I don't know, talk about ADHD or something like that.
Yeah.
But it'd be great to have you back on the show. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you again.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to subscribe, like, comment, and check out the other videos. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.